Welcome to AskSMEAnything. Your chance to ask the IT Pro TV subject matter experts questions live. Here's your host, Don Pizzette.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to Asks Me Anything, the show where you, the viewers, get a chance to ask questions to all of the subject matter experts right here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don Pizzette, and for this episode, we have Joe Peacock in studio with us. Joe, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Don.
And Joe, I always think of you as our resident ITIL expert, but before we kick off the show, would you mind kind of summarizing for everybody what your area of expertise is?
Well, I guess, yes, I am known for ITIL, which is service management to those that haven't had any involvement in that side of things, but not just service management. I deal specifically with governance. And so by governance, we mean all things that control IT. So from the service management side of things, which is the daily business as usual, day-to-day operations, right the way through to the project management side of things as well, which is the requests from the business that we then develop and that we then create and deliver business value, which we then turn over to operations for them to manage.
So basically bureaucracy and paperwork.
Yeah, that'd be about it. Yeah, lots of red tape. Right. No. Seriously.
Well, these are very big areas, very important. Service management, governance, ITIL in general, all areas that I know we have a number of viewers out there that are studying and working towards. So in this episode, we've got our chance to answer questions that you guys might have. If you are scratching your head right now wondering, how do I ask a question? Well, let me tell you, the easiest way is to jump on Twitter and post a question and tag it with hashtag AskSMEAnything. Our marketing team monitors for that and sends the questions over to me live during the show. So if you post a question right now, guess what? I'll see it. Now, hopefully we have time to get to it and we'll answer it right here on the show. If we don't have time, though, we will try and get back to you either in a following show or just a direct tweet. We do what we can to answer all the questions people have. If you're an IT Pro TV subscriber, you can jump into our Q&A forums and post there. We prioritize those questions and make sure we get to them first, but we do try to get to everybody. So please make free use of hashtag AskSMEAnything. And remember, it works not just live during the show, but all throughout the week. We accrue? That might not be the right word. We aggregate those questions together and bring them into the show. So for example, a question just came in a moment ago about Solus Linux. We're going to hold off on that question because this is going to be Joe's show. And Joe, you don't use Solus Linux, do you?
No, not that I'm aware of anyway.
All right. So we will hold that question. We'll get to it in another bit. But for right now, we're going to be diving into our ITIL and other service management type questions. The first one just happens to be ITIL, which is why I keep saying that. So our first question that we're going to start with here is, where do I start when implementing ITIL? So Joe, for an organization that is not following any kind of standards-based framework, how do they get started?
Well, the first thing that I always tell any organization is that, you've got the question wrong. You're not implementing ITIL. ITIL is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not plug and play. ITIL is actually a framework for managed services. So anybody that does want to implement ITIL, you want to be looking at the ITIL books, but you don't want to be implementing ITIL. You want to be adapting ITIL to suit your environment. So I don't want you to take the processes that we have in the ITIL books and implement them in a prescriptive way. If you do that, then what you're going to implement is just what you mentioned actually earlier on, which is about more bureaucracy and a lot of red tape. And that's exactly what we don't want. It's not going to work like that. So the first thing that I want you to do is to approach it in a more flexible way and to think about implementing an ITIL-based framework. What we want is a set of processes that are going to deliver services to your business environment efficiently and effectively. Now, when I say the word efficiently, I mean efficiently. I mean with minimal bureaucracy, not with too much bureaucracy. Everybody automatically associates ITIL with red tape and bureaucracy. Don did exactly the same just then, right? It's just
I'm glad I could live up to our stereotypes.
So we don't want to start with necessarily just the ITIL books. What we want to do is evaluate your organization and find out where those inefficiencies are. Now, the first thing that I'll always tell everybody to do is when we are implementing any service management framework is to actually go out there and populate your service catalog. If you're trying to manage your services, which is exactly what you're doing with any sort of management framework, you need to know what services you're trying to manage. And so you need to know what services you have. You will be surprised how many organizations that there are out there in the big wide world that have no clue what services they actually provide to their business. I wonder how many services, how many old servers there are sitting around that are kind of acting as doorstops, but at the same time, they're still plugged into the network and you access them, or one person accesses them once a year. There's quite a lot of that around. And so what you need to do in order to be able to manage all of those services is to find out where they are. And that would be the first place to start. So look at your services, document them so that you've got a representation of exactly what you've got. You'll be surprised because I can tell you now most organizations will come back with at least 25% more than they thought they actually had. And it's at that point in time then you need to start thinking about service level management and ensuring that all of your customers and all of your IT people have an expectation for the level of service that they're going to provide so that your customers know what to expect, your users know what to expect, and also that IT know what to expect as well, so they know what they have to deliver and what they've committed to. And then after that, then we can start looking at other processes like incident management and problem management. It's funny that the knee-jerk reaction to everybody that wants to implement an ITIL framework is always to start with incident and problem, because that seems to be where the challenges lie. But then if you start with incident and you don't know what services you have, then how can you fix a service if you don't know what that service is? So you're trying to fix something, you're trying to restore service when you don't even know what that service should look like in the first place. So start off with your catalog, then take a look at service level management, and then we move on to incident and problem management.
You know, I worked at an organization a while back that had an IT department of about 100 people, and we got a new CIO. And when the new CIO came in, he said that he wanted to implement the ITIL framework throughout our organization, that we wanted to follow that methodology. And what he did, and I thought this was a pretty novel approach, is he said the first step is we're going to implement proper change management controls. And he didn't even necessarily have a handle on all our services. What he said was, I don't know all of our services, but I need to at least stay on top of what's being changed, what's going on. And so he implemented that first and then slowly went in and started addressing other things. Now, it was a neat approach. It was effective. Have you seen other people follow that pathway, or is that more unique?
The issue that you have with that, and I have seen other people trying to implement sort of in a piecemeal approach, but the issue that we have with that is that when you're implementing sort of say change management, you end up with a situation where you have change management implemented for some services, but not for others. And so you develop an inconsistency there. And you also develop a sense of, well, kind of left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing, in as much as you have staff then that don't know what process to follow. In that, oh, well, if it's for this service, then we follow this particular process. But if it's for this service, we follow this process. And that's not efficient. And of course, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to implement efficiencies across the whole of IT. So whilst that might work in an individual organization, it would still leave a degree of confusion. So it wouldn't necessarily be the most recommended option.
All right. So key thing, though, is that there are options. But you start by just figuring out what your service catalog is, figure out exactly what it is that you're doing, and then from there, you figure out how to manage it.
And a service catalog doesn't have to be elaborate. And I think this is probably one of the misconceptions that people have, is a service catalog just needs to be a very simple, right at the very start, document that says these are what services we have. And it can be a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be an elaborate database. And I think that's where the misconception is. And that's probably why you'll see organizations start off with other processes, because they believe that trying to implement a service catalog is going to be a lot of overhead and a lot of hard work. But it doesn't necessarily have to be like that.
All right, well, let's step over to our next question, which also came at us via Twitter using hashtag AskSMEAnything. The question is there any compliant ITIL software out there? And I chuckled a bit when I saw this question because I asked the same question a couple of years ago when I was getting involved in ITIL. Now, I have a background in project management, and I'm a PMP. So the Project Management Institute, or PMI, sets this rules for how you manage a project. And when I choose project management software, I always look for software that's PMI compliant, right? And so when I started learning about ITIL, I said, okay, well, what software can I use that's ITIL compliant? And that was not an easy question to answer. So I'm gonna put it to you, Joe, here. Is there any compliant ITIL software out there?
Okay, well, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to give you the official answer, and then I will actually head you down towards some answer that's going to help you, really. In terms of ITIL compliancy, because ITIL is a flexible framework and everybody's adaptation of the ITIL framework and everybody's implementation is unique, because of that, there is no actual official ITIL compliant software. Okay, so that's the official answer out of the way. So we're done with that. There's no ITIL compliance because ITIL is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and ITIL is different for everybody. And that makes sense. And as well as being an official answer, it's kind of the sensible answer. But then what we have got, just so that you're not flailing around in the dark and just, trying to and guess as to what software there is, or maybe just listen to your best friend because they've done it before and so they know exactly what it is you need to implement. We have an ITIL based audit that is performed by an external organization. It's independent, and what they will do is it's not every year, it's every time an organization, a software manufacturer releases a new version of the software, then that software is submitted for audit. And the audit is something called Pink Verify. And what you can do, and I'm going to take you to a website now, actually, because I believe my laptop is linked up to the screen. So I'm going to take you to Google. And I'm not too sure if we can see my laptop right now. I'm assuming that we can. Excellent. So very simply, in Google, I want just simply type in Pink Verify. And you will see, let's go to Pink Verify 2018, and you will see options there for you. You can see that I've actually looked at this before because it's a question that's often asked of me, to be honest. So just select any of the options there that you've got that have got Pink Verify. Make sure it's one that's got the trademark next to Pink Verify. Only then you'll know that that's actually a legitimate website. And if we just click here, you'll see that what we have is the Pink Verify Service Management Tool Suite Assessment Service. Now, you'll notice that it doesn't say it's an ITIL assessment. They'll tell you that it's Service Management Assessment. You'll also see here that they will assess according to the 16 service management processes. And again, whilst it says here features against ITIL terminology and functionality, it does actually tell you that it's going to assess against the service management processes, not against the ITIL processes. So you can see what processes you can be assessed against. And then later on this particular page, you can download the white paper that will give you more information about the considerations that they look for. They also have, and this is definitely worth doing, even for your organization itself, it's really worth looking at the criteria for every single process, and it will tell you what the criteria is that's being audited against. And then you'll see here this particular link that is almost hidden where it says view the list of tool sets here. If we click on that link, now don't be put off by the fact that it says 2011, because obviously that's the ITIL version of 2011. We do have a new version that's currently being worked on right now to incorporate sort of agile methodologies. So and DevOps, taking a look at DevOps there. So watch this space for that. But right now we're still auditing on 2011, and you'll see here as we scroll down, you'll see the vendor. so the supplier. You'll also see what the tool is and the version number. And when I said to you that as every single tool releases a new version, then the tool supplier, the manufacturer, can submit their particular tool for assessment. It's completely optional. However, manufacturers, tool providers are finding that if they're not appearing on this list, then, to be perfectly honest, they're losing out by way of competitiveness. And you'll also see here on the right-hand side the processes that each particular tool has passed. Not the processes that they've been audited against, but the processes that they have passed. So this particular one at the top here, they have passed with asset management, availability management, capacity management, change, etc. And it's actually arranged by way of the number of processes that have been passed. So you'll see that right at the very top we had 16 processes, and then as we move down you'll see lots of manufacturers or lots of tool suites that have less than 16. So we've moved down and we're now looking at 11. Some manufacturers you'll see more than once because maybe they've got different software suites, or maybe it's because they've got different versions that are actually appearing on this list. Now, this is not going to tell you whether the tool is right for you, because don't forget we've got to adapt ITIL, but what it is going to do is it's going to give you a sense of comfort and a sense of security that the tool has been assessed and audited against certain criteria and against, the service management criteria that appears in the ITIL books. So it's certainly somewhere to start anyway.
Yeah, and just because it doesn't hit all 16 processes doesn't mean it's bad, right? Because it might be something very specific. I scrolled to the very bottom of the list. I think the last one was some kind of asset management software. Right. And since it's just doing asset management, it meets one process. It's not bad software. It's just very, very focused on that one process. Right.
It's focused on that one process. And what it does actually tell you is that if it only meets the criteria for one process, if you're looking for maybe a relationship into another process, for instance, change management, then that's something that you need to evaluate with the tool manufacturer. It doesn't necessarily mean that that tool is bad at change management. It just means that, maybe the relationships, etc., haven't quite passed audit. But nevertheless, it might meet your requirements. So I wouldn't rule something out just because it's not on the list. However, I know a lot of organizations that will select something that's sort of fairly high up on the list. You have to consider what your specific requirements are. And if you don't require all of those 16 processes, then you don't need to be looking right the way at the top of the list.
All right. So definitely a nice big giant page of data to go through there on your own. But know that, like Joe said, if it's not in the Pink Verify list, that doesn't mean it's off limits. It just hasn't been through their test, their audit to make sure that it meets the needs.
And I can tell you, just as an aside, as somebody who's been a part of these audits are incredibly stringent, and what they ask for and the evidence that we have to submit it's a lot. And so it's not uncommon for a tool manufacturer to miss out on a process because quite simply they couldn't get the right amount of sample data available at the time of the audit.
Yeah, it's an involved process, and it takes a number of people. And you know about how long one of those audits takes? Like if we submitted something?
It really depends on, to start off with, you don't submit it. What actually happens is that you will submit for audit. You'll apply to take part in the audit, and then when you think that you're ready, so you'll download all of the audit criteria, and when you think you're ready as a manufacturer or a tool provider, then you will go back to Pink Verify and you will say, okay, I think we're ready, and you need then to submit your evidence. But then what happens after that is that a date is arranged and you will have a live audit where you will have to go through a live demo with an auditor on I was going to say one-on-one basis, but it's generally not, because there's usually about 4 people from the tool manufacturer and 1 auditor. And you will have to demonstrate absolutely everything in a live environment. So all of the evidence that you've submitted, you have to then demonstrate that it works. So you'd better make sure that your test environment is working at that point in time. For each process, it takes about 3 days.
All right, so it's not too bad once you get through that, but then once you're on the list, it's far easier for companies to adopt that software. So definitely worth it. All right, let's move over to our next question, coming at us from again from #AskSMEAnything, which is, why is proactive problem management so important?
Oh, it's not a tough question, actually. That's a relatively easy one. It's the difference between firefighting and fire prevention, really. A lot of organizations, when they first implement problem management, and problem management is about establishing the root cause, why something went wrong. So it's the root cause of an incident or many incidents. So an incident management is all about actually restoring service, and problem management is about finding out why it went wrong. Proactive problem management is about actually preventing failures. So it's about identifying potential points of failure and preventing them from failing. So it really is the difference between, fire prevention and firefighting. Why is it so important? Well, because if we've got proactive problem management implemented and it's working, then you'll find that it reduces the number of incidents because we're stopping things from failing. But not only does it reduce the number of incidents, but it then actually reduces the number of problems that are raised as well. Because if you're preventing a failure, then there won't be an incident raised. And because there won't be an incident raised, then we won't then have to find out the cause of that incident because we've prevented it. So proactive problem management is really about moving an organization from firefighting mode through to fire prevention mode. In other words, preventing failures from happening. And in terms of adding value, which is what we always want to do within IT, is add value to the business. In terms of adding value, I'll quite often have people that will say to me, well, if the customer or my user, and I've heard this, okay, but if the customer or the user doesn't see a failure, then they don't really value us. It's something that you've probably heard as well. Yeah. Well,
in my days as a network engineer, what I always said was, when I'm doing my job right, nobody knows I'm here.
Right.
And so that's how you're measured sometimes.
Well, exactly. But unfortunately, a lot of people see this as an issue in that, well, if they don't know that I'm here, then, we're not going to get any we're going to get our budgets cut, or we're not going to get any funding. So what we actually want to do is we want to show them that we're here and let's have a few incidents slip through. That's exactly what we don't want to do. Proactive problem management is about preventing incidents. It's about keeping the business running. Ultimately, if you were to work out the average cost per incident to your organization, you'd find out that it's actually quite substantial. It's not just about the fact that maybe you can't get into email for 5 minutes, but maybe you can't get into email for 5 minutes. That's 5 minutes worth of downtime for you. Okay, that's only 5 minutes. But then you've had 5 people working on that particular incident in IT, trying to get email back up and running again. So that's no longer 5 minutes. That's all of a sudden, you've got 6 people working, right? That's 30 minutes. And then during that 30 minutes, you could have potentially lost a sale, or you could have potentially lost a contract with a new external customer. And that could actually mean business loss to the organization. So even 5 minutes downtime is still quite a substantial cost. And sometimes we have to buy in new equipment and we have to purchase something in order to fix a problem, in order to, get things back up and running again through incident management. And again, there's a cost involved. So preventative problem management, proactive problem management actually saves the company money in the long term.
Now, there are some things we do that kind of, I don't know, teeter on the edge between the two, right? Like continual process improvement, or CPI, that you're looking at problems you've already got and then trying to figure out how to minimize, reduce, or eliminate them in the future. So you're kind of being reactive and proactive at the same time, right? Where does that kind of fall in that model?
Right. Okay. So we don't have CPI. We'll have CSI, continual service improvement, that looks at processes as well. But I'm talking about ITIL. I'm talking specifically about ITIL acronyms. And I know that really throughout sort of, this particular episode, all we've looked at really is ITIL and service management, because it's quite a hot topic. But within CSI, we want to ensure that we are doing things like performing trend analysis. And that is still part of proactive problem management. It's actually performing trend analysis, identifying incidents that have been repeated, incidents that have happened again, or maybe incidents that haven't quite been related to each other. And yet, when you look at them from an external perspective, you see that actually the fact that you couldn't get into email was linked to the fact that, say, Cherokee couldn't get into email because there was some issue with email. Whereas at the time when they were addressed as incidents, they were addressed separately. And so proactive problem management also performs trend analysis, and again uses trend analysis to identify where something went wrong that wasn't previously picked up on that can prevent it going wrong again.
All right. Well, you mentioned that we've kind of been on the ITIL track, and we're gonna continue with that trend on this next question. But it is gonna reach outside because our next question that came at us from Twitter is: can governance principles be applied outside of IT? Right? In ITIL, the first two letters are information technology, right? So it's obviously geared towards the IT department. Can those principles be applied outside of IT?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I was asked that question by Axelos only just a couple of months ago. And I was asked if I could just do a quick video for them, just a quick sort of demonstration that ITIL can be applied to absolutely anything. And when I think about this, we've got within ITIL, we've got service strategy and design and transition and operations. And I think about project management as a whole in our lives. And I think somebody mentioned earlier on today about building a house, and that's always an analogy I use when it comes to ITIL, because in service strategy what we did was we went to the bank and we asked them for money. That's exactly what we did. And so what happens in service strategy is everything that is needed when you're building a house. So you need to go to the bank with a really solid business case. You need to go to them with that justification for why I need X amount of dollars or pounds or euros or whatever. And then at the end of service strategy, you get this yes or no. Yes, you've got the money. Okay, so now we go to the architect. And this is what service design is doing. Service design is performing the role of the architect. This is where we actually map out what that house is going to look like, but not just visually what it's going to look like, but also the services that you're going to get connected to the house. And when we talk about service level management, we're talking about actually managing the contracts that we have with our utilities provider and the contracts that we have with, say, our internet provider, etc. So that's all part of service level management. And then through transition, well, that's when we're actually building the house. Now, if we get it wrong in service design and the architect doesn't quite get the right tiles for the bathroom, then, well, what's going to happen in service transition is the builder's going to come along and he's going to build exactly what's in the design. And if the design is wrong, then you end up with a door exactly where you don't need to have a door. And what I always use when we're in a classroom, and the analogy I always use is, if there's a window above your toilet, whose fault is it?
It should have been seen in the blueprints, right? In the design.
Yeah, that's down to the design. And that's got absolutely nothing to do with IT. We're talking about building a house here. And then, at the end of transition, that's when the keys are handed over to that homeowner. And ideally, what should happen at the end of transition is that homeowner should literally be able just to walk into that house. It's been built exactly according to specifications. They should be able to go and open that fridge, and inside that fridge is a nice chilled bottle of wine, which is exactly what you said you wanted when you were talking to the architect. A nice chilled bottle of wine. You open up that kitchen cabinet and your glasses are in exactly the place where you said you wanted them, and then you go and sit down on your nice comfy sofa, because that was the exact sofa that you ordered, and you sit back, you put your feet up on the coffee table that they've put in there right in the position that you wanted it in, and you turn on your nice 90-inch TV screen and watch whatever it is, the latest movie. But I know that this is all kind of tongue-in-cheek, but the simple fact is that ITIL principles can be applied to just about anything. And, whether you're dealing with your utilities provider in real life, or whether you're dealing with, the relationship between the customer or the business and IT, you still need to have a contract in place, and you need to have some document where the responsibilities of both parties are written down and are agreed. If we're talking about change management, let's face it, if you didn't have some form of change management in your day-to-day world, in any environment, then without that control, we'd kind of descend into chaos. Our lives would be a bit of a mess. Now, I want to expand on that slightly because we do have, let's get out of ITIL for a moment, we do have methodologies like Verisma. And Verisma or VerySM, it depends on, I've heard it pronounced both ways by the examining board actually, so so we don't mind what you call it. But Verisma takes the ITIL principles and the service management principles and then says, well, look, these do apply to the business environment as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this this framework and look at exactly how we can apply it to the business environment and step out of IT, because you see, IT, when ITIL first came around in the 1980s, IT was very niche. It was a very sort of, a niche environment, and the skills that were needed within IT were, again, very niche. So we were kind of isolated from the business world, whereas now IT is a part of absolutely everything that we do, which means that our principles can be applied to just about anything that we do within the business world.
I guess if we think about it, if we were to roll back the clock, right, go back in time to before ITIL, which I don't know, what year was ITIL officially published the first time?
Well, ITIL was kept within the government for a little while, within the UK government, but it was in the late 1980s when version 1 came out.
Before that, before it existed, when they sat down and said, that's it, we need to put together a framework to help organize our IT departments better. It's not like they invented this stuff from scratch, right? They took a lot of these ideas from other areas and incorporated them in IT. So now it's almost like we've gone full circle and we're saying, can we take these ideas and apply them outside? But that's where they came from originally, right?
Right. I mean, everybody has this this sort of, I guess, misconception that ITIL came from the UK government and it was one of those sort of government mandated things. And in fact, version 1 of ITIL was more of a doorstop than anything else, because version 1 of ITIL consisted of 44 books. It was 44 sets of white papers written by academics, which you can guess how much notice everybody took of it. So it wasn't until version 2 of ITIL came around that ITIL actually became popular, and even then it was because it was freely available. But actually what ITIL was is a collection of best practices that had worked in the business environment. And it came about because, quite simply, the government at the time they'd seen all of these things appearing on desks and said, you know what, we need to manage these, and we need to manage these in an impartial way. And we also have to be able to demonstrate efficient use of taxpayer money. And we don't know how to do that. IT is a new concept. We don't know what to do. And so the CCTA, or the OGC, went out at the time to the big wide world and went out to a lot of organizations that had nothing to do with government and said, how do you manage your IT? And then they evaluated, which is why I mentioned a set of academics, they evaluated what worked and what didn't work, and what worked they documented. So yeah, ITIL came from outside of IT, as well as from organizations like IBM, for instance, which were firmly inside of IT. So yeah, it should be, if applied right, it should be valid in just about any business environment.
Excellent. Well, that was a great question from out there in the field. And for those of you that are wondering how you can ask the questions, be sure to jump on Twitter and use hashtag AskSMEAnything. Post those questions out there. We answer them live during the show. Or if we don't get to it during the show, we'll hold it and answer it in the next show. Our next question actually brings it to something you mentioned. You mentioned Verisma or VerySM or whatever we want to call it. This question is, how do SIAM, ITIL, and Verisma work together? And I know one of the three, so I couldn't speak to any of this, but Joe, I'm sure you can shed some light on that.
Right, okay. Yes, I can. So right now in our course library, we've got SIAM and we've got ITIL as well, and we are currently working on Verisma too. So ITIL we all know about. Okay, ITIL is a framework for managing our IT services, but ITIL looks at a service provider organization that is, well, kind of atypical now. It's not really common where we have one service provider organization that is providing services for a business. What tends to happen now is that in reality, business gets their services from a lot of different places. And so when we think of Microsoft now, we're doing software as a service, for instance, we have Office 365. So our IT organization within our own business generally doesn't have control over Office anymore. That's something that we allow Microsoft to do. So whereas ITIL has traditionally focused itself on the single service provider approach. I mean, that's not to say it can't be applied to multiple service providers. However, it has predominantly got its focus on the single service provider. What SIAM does is SIAM looks at the environment where we have multiple service providers. And so SIAM provides the framework for a multiple service provider approach, which is a lot more typical in the 21st century, now that we have things like software as a service with Microsoft and with a lot of other services. I think of Adobe as well. I think of Google and the fact that, we've got so many cloud services like Dropbox, etc. now that are not actually, whilst we're providing them to the organization, they're not supported by us. And so that's what SIAM predominantly looks at. And then I already mentioned in our last question about Verisma, and Verisma takes the service management approach and says, well, you know what, we can apply this to our organization as well. And let's have common processes that actually are across our organization. So if we've got a change management process, which was something that you mentioned, I think, right at the very start, if we've got a change management process, why aren't we applying that change management process across the board to our organization as well? Because then everybody's fully aware of their expectations. These are not just IT's expectations. These are expectations across the board within the organization. So if I want to make a request for something, then I know how I go about making that request. There's a consistency. And because there's a consistency, then there's an efficiency.
Excellent. I know it gets confusing, especially when new frameworks are coming out. It seems like all the time. It's really not that frequently, right? But I think they're gaining popularity faster now than they used to. I
think what we've got now, I'll be honest, is we've got different flavors of pretty much the same thing. When we talk about service management frameworks, a service management framework can apply across multiple environments. And all that's happened with SIAM and with Verisma is that we've taken the service management framework and we've just kind of diversified a little bit. But essentially, we're talking about the same principle. We're talking about having a common set of processes, and we're talking about having consistency. And with that consistency, we should be breeding efficiency as well as effectiveness.
Excellent. And we didn't even stack on top of that, like Agile and Six Sigma and all the other things that people kind of mess around with. And it's important in certain industries, but can be used pretty much anywhere. Right.
Yeah. And that's another thing, actually. Whilst you mention that, you say be used anywhere. One of the things about having we certainly have all of our qualifications in our course library now. And one of the bonuses about the all of these frameworks is that they do come with qualifications now, in that you can study for these particular methodologies and these frameworks. And that gives you something to put on your resume or on your CV, which allows you to be more adaptable. It allows you to be more, I was going to say, marketable and employable, because if I know what an incident is, and I know the definition of an incident, and I know what it is in this organization, then I also know what it means to your organization too. So if I come to your organization as an employee, I can ask the question, well, who's in charge of incident management? And we both know what we're talking about. We're both talking the same language, and that's really important. And it really does put people at an advantage, but it's now become pretty much a prerequisite now on most sort of job applications, where people are really looking for sort of ITIL foundation as a minimum.
Now, Joe, we're running a little low on time, but what you just said right there is a perfect segue into this other question. So I'm going to try and squeeze this one in here before we wrap up. Speaking of terminology and overlap, right? There's a lot of overlap between these technologies. The question that came in from Twitter is, what's the difference between operations management and project management? And I know, as somebody with a project management background, the things that I learned in my PMP studies overlaps a lot with what you find in ITIL and in other areas. So what is that difference between operations management and project management?
Well, to put it simply, I mean, we referred to the analogy of building a house earlier on, and I said that ITIL, can be applied to absolutely anything. And so what will happen within a service management environment is that, when service strategy, we go to the bank and we ask them for money. We come up with a strategy for our build. And it's at that point in time, then we go to the architect and then we move into the transition phase of the build. What project management does, so everything that I've just described up until now is part of business as usual. What project management does, though, it gives us a methodology, it gives us a consistent approach to the actual build. So it allows us for consistent design of a new service. It allows us for consistent build of a new service, consistent development. And then at the end of development, which is at the end of sort of transition, then that is then handed over into what we would consider to be operations, which would be the business as usual. So project management is giving consistency to the design and the build and the testing and the deployment, and operations is giving consistency to the running, the day-to-day business as usual of our IT organization itself.
And one might lead to the other, right? Like we might have a project that's developing a process, and that process then becomes part of our operations. So you might actually kind of go through the whole cycle.
Right, and it carries on actually after that, because generally, I mean, let's face it, we don't keep Microsoft Excel for 10 years. After, certainly nowadays, after 6 months or a year, we're looking for another version. We're looking for more features. We're looking for enhancements. So business as usual then leads to future projects because it leads to future development. Now, you mentioned Agile earlier on, and I know that we're running out of time, but I just want to mention this because Agile looks at iterative development and iterative deployment into, we call it in Agile continuous deployment, but really what we're looking at is it's pretty much what we get nowadays from absolutely everything, which is if we look at Microsoft Office, for instance, you get your updates at least once a month, which is an update of the latest features. That's what we call an agile deployment because we are deploying on an iterative basis. So we're operating business as usual for a month, and then we have a new deployment, which is project management. And then we operate business as usual for a month, and then that leads to something else. Now, the one thing that I want to mention here is that operations feeds into project management because it's the issues that we have during normal business operation. It's those sticking points, it's those incidents that we have and the problems that we identify that then feed into the next build. And they feed into the start of the next phase of the project. So everything just comes around in one big circle now.
All right. Well, Joe, you have been a just wealth of knowledge as always. So I appreciate you being on the show with us.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to remind everybody else out there in TV land that this show is built upon the questions from viewers like you. So if you have questions, and not just on project management, service management, operations management, but on any IT-related topic, please feel free to throw them out there on Twitter with hashtag AskSMEAnything, and we will monitor those, and we kind of divide them up based on which subject matter expert is on the show with me. So today we did focus on those. Also, if you're an IT Pro TV subscriber, jump into our Q&A forums on the site. If you post questions there, we prioritize those, make sure they get answered first before we jump into the general population. But everybody is welcome to post out there on Twitter to hashtag AskSMEAnything. We love to hear from you, and that's basically how we build all the content for these episodes. And as always, if you want to learn more on any of these topics, be sure to check out the IT Pro TV library. If you go to our website, oddly enough, it's itpro.tv. You can check out our course library. We have tons of content on, well, darn near everything we talked about everything that we talked about in this show. Yeah. So definitely dive in there and check it out as a subscriber. You get access to the whole library, so you can learn about all of it, really only limited by the amount of time you have in your life. So be sure to check that out. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.